Today, my guest is author Jon Katz. We will be talking to Jon about his new book from Villard Books, Random House, Soul of a Dog, Reflections on the Spirits of the Animals of Bedlam Farm. An author of 18 books, Jon previously worked as a reporter and editor, was executive producer for the CBS Morning News, and produced a documentary with Bill Moyers about Atlantic City. Jon has owned and operated Bedlam Farms in upstate New York for almost 8 years, and since that time has written 8 works on the subject of dogs, farm animals, and rural life, including his latest book, Soul of a Dog. In addition, he writes a column about dogs and appears on public radio. Jon, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I appreciate being here.
Not at all. Jon, the main focus of your book is a question that Aristotle, Plato, Thomas Aquinas have been obsessed with over the centuries, and that is the question of animal souls. And we're going to get into certainly a discussion about that. But I want to begin with the fact that this all began when your life changed drastically. You settled on a farm, and your latest work, Soul of a Dog, elaborates upon what you and many people have come to learn and believe about their animals. So, starting with that, just give my listeners a brief overview on this book.
Well, I was very curious about the growing belief Americans have in preoccupation with whether their dogs and cats have souls or not. I saw a Harvard study that showed that in a generation ago, only 2% of Americans thought their dogs had souls. A couple of years ago, they did the same survey that was exactly the opposite. It showed that 98% of Americans thought their companion animals had souls and were going to heaven. And I was fascinated by why such a change. What accounts for such a big change? So I decided to explore the question through the lives of my own dogs and animals on the farm, and look at this question of animal spirits, and also of the need people have to have this discussion, since the animals aren't really having it.
Well, and you've certainly covered it beautifully in this book and your other books, but this book in particular. Can you define the term soul as you use it in talking about animals?
Yes, there's two contexts for the term. Of course, there's a religious context, which generally means the spirit that's going on to heaven and the afterlife, and then there's the secular, which is the one I use, which is the animating spirit of an animal or a person.
Okay.
And so for a working dog, that might be work, or for my lab, that might be love. And it's so I would define it pretty narrowly in the sense of the way I came to see it was the impact the animal has on us and people, and also the question of our need for them and why we need for them to have souls.
Well, so then I think you've pretty much answered the next question, but I'm going to ask you to elaborate on it a little bit. And the question is whether you've ever considered yourself a spiritual individual or secular, and the beliefs and the philosophies that you are talking about in the book. Is this something that grew with you then on the farm? And it seems to have done so. Am I correct?
Yes. Well, I think I'm certainly interested in spirituality. I'm not really conventionally all that religious, and I certainly didn't approach the book that way. I think that, to me, the spirituality in animals is a very important part of having them. And I think that more and more we're seeing people's need for companion animals is growing and intensifying.
Absolutely.
People are equating dogs and cats to children. They're spending a lot of money on their health care. They see them as their best friends, their therapists, their soulmates. So these are very spiritual terms and ideas. And I think there's a growing spiritual connection between animals and people that grows very much out of Americans, especially Americans, need for connection, need for love, and need for security. Mm-hmm. And I think our culture, including religion, unfortunately, politics, technology, are not really making people feel connected and secure.
Very good point. Yes, a very good point.
And even before the troubled economy, which certainly adds to it, you have the technology. People are on the internet. Nobody wants to talk to anybody anymore. and people are finding life very disconnected. Their work is often unsatisfying and pressure-filled. They listen to too much news from too many places, and it's all bad. And so I think the institutions we used to rely on, even the family, which is broken up a bit, religion, politics has become very divisive. So fewer places to turn for the kind of security and anchoring that we used to get.
Well, I want to get into that with you also, because that certainly is the focus of your book. But we need to start with your giving us some brief background on what led you to buying a farm. And from what I read in the material that was sent to me, it involved an earlier Border Collie named Orson. Is that correct?
Yes, well, it was just, life is strange, and I think somebody sent me a rescue Border Collie from Texas, and I got quite involved in training him, and in the process of training him, I went out to a Pennsylvania farm. I was living in New Jersey at the time. In the course of training him, I took him out to a sheep herding farm in Pennsylvania. I got very interested in the farm, very interested in sheep herding, and that working with dogs. And then I think the possibility kind of dawned on me of how great it would be to write about issues relating to dogs and people. So I wrote a book called The Dog Year, which was about my year sort of getting drawn into dog writing and getting interested in the attachments between people and dogs.
Well,
and that led me to buying the farm.
Uh-huh. And then that
book...
It
was a good move creatively. I've written five or six books up here.
Right.
I'm actually selling the farm, interestingly enough.
Oh, no.
And I know, but it's not a bad thing. I found the farm, I'm changing my writing to do a number of different things, and I just found I just couldn't get the time to really do my work.
Are we talking to you now are you at your farm now?
Yes, I'm at the farm. Yes, I'm going to be here a while, but I really want to do different kinds of work, and I think I had to choose really between being a farmer and a writer. And if you have a 100-acre farm and 4 barns, you just you have to struggle to find time to write.
Well, yeah, and I had started to interrupt you before when you were talking, and pardon me for doing that, but we have so many questions to cover here, and certainly not a lot of time, sadly. But the book that you mentioned, A Dog Year, was made into a movie on television, starred Jeff Bridges. What was that like, again, briefly, seeing yourself and your animals portrayed in a movie? How did you feel about it?
I was very strange, I have to say. I don't have a really good perspective on it. It was just odd, and it'll be a long time figuring it out, I think.
Probably.
Jeff Bridges is a great actor, and I like to say that they picked him because he looks just like me. That's sadly not true.
He is a great actor.
He's a great actor. So that was very flattering. I find it very strange. It was just a strange kind of experience.
Well, and I'm going to have to interrupt you from time to time because we do want to cover so many questions here, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
One important thing that I want to be sure that we cover, and for my listeners just tuning in, we are talking to Jon Katz in his new book, Soul of a Dog. In your book, you describe the farm, and specifically Rose, the Border Collie, who's on the cover of this book, and your latest Border Collie, is, quote, saving your life. And I wanted to talk with you about that. How did you mean that?
Well, Rose has kind of saved and affected my life in a number of very important ways. She has literally saved my life in the sense of a number of times I've fallen down in the winter here and knocked myself out, and she would get me up by nipping on my ear until I moved. We've had encounters with wild pigs and feral cats and all kinds of dramas out in the woods. A ram once was running up behind me and knocked me down and was banging me into a fence post, and she ran up and drove him off and ran him down the hill. So she's an amazing character, and I also felt, and this is the part that you have to think about. I felt I really couldn't live here without her. I'm not sure that's true, but that was my belief about her. She's so competent. She's one of those Border Collies that just takes responsibility, makes decisions.
Well, I had a Border Collie, and years ago, and when I read that description of the winter on the farm, I sure felt that way for you, that you really did need her there. She's quite a gal.
The dogs we need, and I think that I needed a dog like that, and she really rose to it.
Now tell us about your dogs, Izzy and Lenore. They're featured in another book called Izzy and Lenore. Oh, is Lenore a dog? I guess I shouldn't preface it by saying, okay.
Lenore is the lab puppy on the cover of the book.
Yeah, and how they both came into your life.
Well, Izzy was a Border Collie that was abandoned on a farm near here. And he lived out in the wild for 5 years. And so I got him. A rescue person brought him to me. And we had a pretty wild time. I finally trained him and calmed him down, and I became a hospice volunteer about that time. And he joined the program with me. He enrolled in the training with me, and he just really calmed down incredibly, and has become this amazing hospice therapy dog. Lenore also is a hospice therapy dog. She's a black lab, and one of those great, friendly, loving, crud-eating dogs. And so the two of them really came into my life and really helped me in a different way. They helped me really reconnect with people and connect with people. And we're just, both very positive. I think I have this theory, as I said, that we get the dogs we need. And I think dogs are very adaptable. They figure out what we need from them. And the working dogs especially try to fit that mode. So I've been very fortunate, and I think it's not an accident that I got dogs. Like, these are the dogs I was looking for. And these are the dogs that I found.
Well, and I was looking at your website yesterday, and while we're talking about that, would you mention your website, please?
Yes, bedlamfarm.com.
I was looking at the website, and we'll talk a little bit in the next segment about your photography, and I was just so enthralled with how far your work has come, how beautiful it is, and this one picture of Lenore that really touched me, and I thought that Lenore was the lab, but then there are so many animals that have been on your farm that you talk about in the book that each have such distinct personalities, and tell us a little bit about some of them. I particularly like the story about the chicken.
Henrietta the hen.
Yes.
One of the things that amazes me about living on a farm with animals is, there's a part of animals that are just hard to account for. It's hard to explain. And I have a bunch of chickens, and chickens are not that interesting as a rule. But then suddenly there came along this chicken I named Henrietta, and she just had this very strange personality. She liked to hop up on the back of donkeys and ride around. She liked to come in the kitchen and walked around like a dog and followed me. And I think she may have thought she was a dog. I'm not sure. But she just was very strange, and she just behaved differently than any chicken I've ever seen. And I couldn't tell you why, really. I couldn't tell you what the difference was.
Right.
She just had a very distinct personality. It was a lot of fun.
And the other one was that big cow, steer. What was it?
Steer named Elvis.
Elvis. That animal was incredible in your description. Talk about that one.
Well, excuse me. Sorry, I said gulp some water there.
Okay.
I had a little bit of a cold. Elvis was a 3,000-pound Swiss steer, and he was kind of a rescue creature. He was about to go to market, and I took him in somewhat foolishly, I have to say. Very, very affable, very sweet creature, very attached to people, and I would go out and sit with him and read next to him and bring him hay, and he just had figured people out. He got people to like him, and he got people to feed him. I gave him Dunkin' Donuts. He loved chocolate donuts, and Snickers bars, and he was very genial. And he really was a lesson to me in sort of acceptance and adaptability. I really loved the way he just kind of rolled with life. Didn't really care if it was raining, if it was snowing, if it was cold. Made no difference to him. He was a very appealing character. Now, he's gone also, I have to say.
Oh.
Because I felt a number of things. He was incredibly expensive and difficult to feed and take care of. And Swiss steers do not live very long. And their knees and legs kind of go bad because they're kind of bred to go to market when they're young. Mm-hmm. So we were running into troubles that way. But it was a great experience for me because I really, again, each of my animals taught me a great thing about myself.
I'd like to go back to Izzy and hospice work. That's such an important part of what you talk about in your book and how he just seemed to take to it. Could you tell us a little story? There's one woman in the book that reacted very strongly to the dog, that beautiful white-haired woman. Could you talk a little bit about that experience between the two of them?
Yes, you probably mean Marion.
Yes.
She had Alzheimer's and hadn't really spoken for 2 or 3 years. And when Izzy came in to see her, she just began to talk again, and she began telling him stories about her life. Very powerful, very honest, and very, very clear stories about her life. Izzy has an amazing impact on people. He gets them to talk to him and to trust him, and he listens to them, I think, is his biggest gift.
And didn't she think that was her dog?
Yes, she looked at him and she said, Izzy, she said, I'm so proud of you. You used to be a little poodle, and now you're just a big black and white dog. And she often will always say that to him. You used to be such a little poodle, and look at you now. But we found this again and again and again, that Izzy kind of reminded people about their dogs, and that was one of the connections that he had to them. They always saw that as a positive, loving thing in their lives, and they were happy to talk about it.
Well, and again, on your website, you had some beautiful pictures of her, and I loved the fact that you were able to portray in your photographs the bond that seemed to develop between the people and the dogs. It was really quite beautiful.
Thank you.
You speak of animals' response to humans, but you also discuss the humans' responsibility to animals. We have a lot of many, thank goodness, organizations within our valley that work to save animals, and the irresponsibility of some humans is what affects so many lost dogs and dogs that unfortunately face euthanasia. Give us a little bit about how you feel about that.
Well, I think getting an animal is an enormous responsibility, and I think unfortunately Americans in particular, get dogs and cats very impulsively because they're cute, or they went to a movie, or they want to give their kid a Christmas present. And dogs and cats are acquired very thoughtlessly. And people don't, I think, understand that they're basically animals. They may be very cute and endearing animals, but they're still animals. And they need understanding and training and a lot of work and patience. And when they don't get it, of course, it's the animals that suffer. People are very quick to give up an animal, to abandon it, or to turn it into a shelter when it doesn't meet their needs, or when they discover that it's an animal and not a child. And so I think this whole area is very important, because I think dogs and cats in particular are paying quite dearly for people's callousness about them.
I like what you just said about they forget that it's an animal and not a child, and that is so true. You see that a lot, that they are treated like children. But I also feel that you mean beyond the physical care of an animal. I really believe what you're saying as well is the love and the comfort and everything else that we give in return for their love. Am I correct in that?
Absolutely, and we attach ourselves very powerfully to them, and we really care about them, and we spend a lot of money on them and a lot of time and energy. In return, they do a great deal for us. They make us feel safe. They give us unconditional love. They give us attention. They don't care what we look like or smell like, and that's what I think people really want from them, is that kind of love. And I think that's where a lot of these issues emulate from. I think people need them very much right now.
And like you said, there's a lot of lonely people out there, and thank goodness for the animals. You had started to talk about earlier, and I'd like you to go ahead with that story about your barn cat and what she taught you about her character.
Well, a friend of mine told me that her cat was just like her child, and so I got interested in this. I thought I should pay attention to Mother the barn cat, who's been very, very affectionate to me, always comes around, likes to get petted and purring. And so I spent an afternoon or two observing her. And I have to say I was quite shocked by what I saw. It was like watching Ted Bundy at work. She just was murdering and mayhem and torture and dismemberment with the most exquisite kind of glee. And, of course, I thought to myself, well, they're really not like us, are they? And if they are like us, we need to call the police, I think. Mm-hmm. So, but of course, she's just being a cat. She's of course not a child, and she's not like children either. She's a cat who, like all cats, likes to kill and torture things sometimes. And that's the nature. And she reminded me that animals are not either good or bad; they're just what they are, and we keep projecting all kinds of thoughts and feelings and ideas onto them. But the truth is, they're really very consistent. A cat will kill a bird if it can, and it's not making a moral decision, it's just being a cat.
It is amazing, though, how cats have not been able to be domesticated as dogs have been, and they continue to be these killers. And I think that is what shocks people. Let's talk a little bit about, and again, you've covered it in some answers and covered in your book. But let's elaborate a little bit about how your life on the farm has enriched your life and your views of these animals, because it has been a learning experience for you.
It's a tremendous learning experience. I mean, a lot of people email me all the time and say, well, you have the perfect life. You're living on a farm with animals. Farm is not a perfect life. Farm is extremely difficult. A tremendous amount of chores. Having animals is an incredible responsibility. You know, it's really 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, vet bills and hay and feed issues and fences, and it's very gratifying. It's very satisfying because I learned a lot about animals, and they can teach us a lot. And I was thrilled at the work I got to do with the dogs and the books that process generated. But at the same time, it also gave me a different view of animals. You know, there's no such thing as a no-kill farm. You know, and farmers have a different attitude about animals because if you don't have a really nuanced view of them, you're not going to be operating very long.
Well, I think what's important, too, for my listeners to understand, for those that might be just tuning in, we are talking to Jon Katz about his new book, Soul of a Dog. You are living on the farm basically alone, and in the middle of winter, you have to get out there and make sure that the animals are okay. And as you talked about, your life has been saved, fortunately, by Rose.
Yes, I went through a difficult period. I did get divorced, and I am now in a new relationship.
Oh, well,
not quite as alone, but I was quite alone for several years on the farm, and that was a tough thing to come up to the farm, and I probably did it for all kinds of reasons I didn't quite understand. Rose was essentially my partner here, and it was Rose and I. And when you spend a winter alone up here, it's upstate New York, up near Vermont, you're really quite alone. I mean, there's nobody nearby. There's nobody to call. You know, you're out in these howling blizzards and 20 below zero. And Rose really made the difference. We had lambing, and she would alert me when something was wrong, when a fence was broken, when a lamb was born, when a coyote was coming around. And I hate to think of what would have happened to me if she'd not been around. Her fealty and her intelligence and her dedication is just astonishing.
Well, and I've been in that part of the country. I used to live back east and spent time in the Adirondack Mountains and way up north and so forth, and I remember how it's unbelievable how cold it is there. So reading about you going through everything, the things that you did, I just found amazing, and I don't know where you found that inner strength to do it. Where did you find that inner strength?
That's a great question. I think the truth is I just had no idea what I was getting into. I probably would have run. And then once you're into it, you know, it's either do or die. The truth is I loved it. I have to say I love the farm. I love being here. I love every minute of it. It was very challenging, sometimes very difficult. But I was in my late 50s when I bought the farm, and I had this idea that our culture kind of pushes us into this downsizing idea about life. As you get older, you're supposed to kind of shrink, go away. And I was thrilled at the opportunity to learn. I became a photographer up here. I wrote 5 books up here. I learned all kinds of things about animals and did all kinds of things with the dogs up here. And I've been nothing but lucky to have these kinds of experiences. It's just been thrilling. And I don't see it as a time of life to shrink. I see it as a time of life where you're really finally free to grow.
Well, are you going to stay in the area? You're talking about selling the farm and
yes,
getting
definitely.
another
I love
one.
the area, and I might just get a smaller farm. But this farm is 4 barns and 100 acres, and it's just too much, especially when you're doing the other kinds of work I'm doing. But I love the area, and I would not think of moving away.
And again, I mentioned how beautiful your photographs are, and people should go on the website and see that. It gives everyone the feeling of your inner soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it. How has the photography enhanced your life?
Photography has been an amazing, miraculous gift to me. I started taking pictures 3 or 4 years ago. And it just opened up this vein in me that I just didn't even know was there. I mean, I think there was some kind of artist just wanting to get out, and it transformed me. I mean, for one thing, photography shows you how to look at the world in a very different way. You look at the light differently. You look at raindrops differently and dead leaves in the eyes of a dog. And I think it's a window into the world. It's just helped me really see the world anew.
And you found beauty in the most extreme of situations at times, in cold and rain and wind, and you did find that beauty. And your wonderful companion was with you all the time. Is that Lenore?
Lenore she has become my photography dog. She
Yes.
loves to come along with me when I take pictures, and she kind of stares at me. In the winter, I'd go out with Rose, of course, and we would take care of the sheep and all. And in the evenings when I'm chasing sunsets, I go out with Izzy. But Lenore actually loves to come along on the picture taking. I just say photo shoot, and she pads along and just lies down and watches me while I'm taking pictures, and very patiently and very curious about it. And that's a great gift. It's nice to be able to blend those two different elements.
Absolutely.
There's always a dog around when I'm taking a picture, and that kind of helps them.
Well, you've been living with and observing your animals for many years, and you have, as I mentioned earlier in the start of the interview, researched other philosophical statements about animals. Why don't you sum up some of your final thoughts and ideas that you have reached in the time that you have been studying them?
Well, I think that we misperceive animals, especially dogs and cats. I think we lose sight of the fact that they're remarkable animals who live by the amazing instincts that we really can't begin to comprehend. I am touched by their acceptance that they don't live by emotion or by reason. They live by instincts, and they accept life as it comes, whether it rains or snows or it's cold. They don't whine and complain about it. They don't watch the Weather Channel. They don't sue each other. And I'm very, very touched by that. I think animals love to do things with people. They love especially people who feed them. I think they're very fond of that. And I think, food and sustenance is a pathway into getting to communicate with animals. I've been very touched by the mysterious parts of a dog. You've had a Border Collie, so you understand there are parts of them that are just beyond our ability to comprehend.
Yes.
I call it the mystery of things. And I love that about them. So I think that's been very exciting for me. I think they've taught me patience. They've taught me to deal with frustration. They give me a lot of affection, and they help me live my life, which is about the highest compliment I can pay.
And I think each person has to make up their own mind whether or not they believe their animal goes to heaven. We won't even get into that discussion.
Absolutely. I don't try to tell people.
No, we
that.
won't do that because some people cannot accept the fact that they don't. Others believe they do. And
it's an individual choice.
Individual choice. And we have about a minute left. So I want to be sure to have you tell my audience what's next for you. What sort of things are you working on? What will you be working on?
Well, I'm doing a series of children's books for Holt Macmillan, and the first one's called Lenore Finds a Friend, and it's about Lenore and the dogs. And I'm turning to fiction. I'm doing a trilogy inspired by Rose. First one's called Rose in a Storm, coming out next year, which is about a Border Collie abandoned on a farm during a blizzard and how the dog deals with that. And it's told from the dog's point of view, which I have to tell you is the most difficult thing I've ever done.
Oh, well, I think you probably will learn even more about dogs by doing that, don't you think?
Yes, I've been talking to behaviorists, and I actually wrote the book. The book is narrated by a dog who doesn't talk. So it's the most creative thing I've ever tried to do, and I'm excited about it.
It sounds wonderful. It does sound like a difficult...
Very difficult. Very difficult. I thought the rubber book because my editor kept sending it back to me.
I think it's going to be wonderful, and I certainly hope that you're going to come back.
Absolutely. Anytime. I really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that, and I'll look for you and Rose in the Storm, and we are out of time. Thanks so much for being here with us. And
thank you, Jacqueline.